I'm sure you've read the title of this episode, and before we start, I want to make a quick disclaimer. I in no way want to undermine or degrade the many achievements of Elizabeth I by choosing this topic, and I hope to make that clear. Because she is so well known, I find it hard to cover her without retreading over other bigger and better documentaries and podcasts, meaning I don't want to make an episode full of things you've already heard. So I decided I wanted to cover a pretty obscure story, or better put, a conspiracy theory about Elizabeth. If you're a fan of her or have spent some time researching her, you've probably come across this tale, one that has been passed down for hundreds of years. It is the story of the Bisley Boy. This story is the purveyor of an arguably forgotten conspiracy theory that Elizabeth I was actually a man. If your eyes just rolled out of your head, I understand. I had a similar reaction. But there is actually a decent amount of evidence to support this. But is it solid evidence? I want to explore this further and see if any part of this conspiracy has any legs to stand on, or if it's just the musings of a small town and famous author. Elizabeth I was born September 7th of 1533. She was the only living child of King Henry VIII and his second wife, Queen Anne Boleyn. She was crowned on January 15th, 1559, after the early death of her elder sister, Mary I. She reigned for 44 years, making her the 8th longest reigning monarch in English history. But the story of the Bisley Boy starts in 1543, 16 years before her coronation, during an outbreak of the bubonic plague in London. During outbreaks like this, the royal family would be moved from London to their country estates and wait out the sickness. That's how the 10-year-old Elizabeth ended up in Bisley, a small farming village a few hours from London, in a manor house called Overcourt, which still stands today. The princess and her household, including her governess, Catherine Champernowne, more commonly known as Cat Ashley, and guardian Thomas Parry, remained at Overcourt Manor for a year, taking in the country air and waiting for the plague in London to run its course. Young Elizabeth was a healthy and lively child who enjoyed playing in the gardens of Overcourt with a local boy named Neville, a boy who allegedly shared the princess's fire-red hair. But suddenly, and without warning, Elizabeth became deathly ill, and within a few hours succumbed to her unexpected illness. Fully aware of the severity of their situation, guardians Cat Ashley and Thomas Parry panicked, knowing that a princess of England had died in their care, and that the king, her father, was scheduled to visit his daughter in a few days' time. They only really had two choices: confess to Henry that his daughter had died in their care and hope he would be merciful, or cover it up. They chose the latter. Frantic, they searched the entire village for a girl that resembled the deceased princess's age and likeness. But due to the size of the village, there was no female children that fit these specifications. Though there was a boy. It was the same boy who often played in the gardens with the princess. The boy with the fire-red hair, Neville. He was around the same age and height, and also shared a passing likeness to Elizabeth. Catherine and Thomas quickly dressed him in the princess's clothing and disposed of the real Elizabeth, reportedly burying her under her bedroom window at Overcourt, the same spot where a body of a young Tudor girl was found 300 years later. When King Henry arrived, he regarded his daughter coldly and discussed formalities with her governess. Satisfied with the conditions, he left. Their ruse had worked. The king was unaware, and the death of the princess remained a secret that only Cat and Thomas knew. The young boy would continue impersonating the princess, and eventually be crowned queen and reign over England in its golden age. The story of the Bisley Boy would survive in local folklore for 400 years, and it probably would have remained in obscurity if it wasn't for a Gothic author made famous by his novel, Dracula, none other than Bram Stoker. In the early 1900s, Stoker visited the small town. At the time, he would have worked as a private assistant to actor Sir Henry Irving, who was scouting in Bisley for a country home. During their visit, Stoker became intrigued by the town's May pageant and their unusual traditions. May Day is an ancient festival meant to celebrate the return of spring and ensure the fertility of crops, livestock, and humans. The festivities include gathering wildflowers, weaving floral garlands, decorating a May tree or May pole, and crowning a May Queen. These practices may vary depending on the country. What surprised Stoker was the town's choice of the May Queen, which is normally a young girl in a white gown with a crown of flowers who rides at the front of the May parade. But in Bisley, a boy was chosen to be the May Queen. He would be dressed in the same white gown and crown as the female May Queen. Upon further investigation, Bram Stoker uncovered the story of the Bisley boy, and in turn found out why the town's May Queen was a cross-dressing boy. The tradition exists as a slight nod to the local boy who became one of the most beloved monarchs in English history. Stoker was so intrigued that he dedicated a chapter to it in his novel Famous Impostors, published in 1910. And the Bisley Boy tale, which probably would have been forgotten, was now public knowledge. I must say, after reading the chapter, I find his argument compelling, but his evidence and content to be lacking. I've compiled what I think is the most noteworthy evidence for and against the Boy Queen. I think the most logical place to start is Elizabeth's appearance before and after the events of 1543. There are two portraits that are commonly scrutinized that reportedly show a young female Elizabeth and an older male Elizabeth. Some think they look like completely different people. And yeah, one is definitely more feminine looking than the other, but these portraits were painted 29 years apart. Elizabeth was 13 in the first and 42 in the second. I actually see a lot of similarities in these portraits, mostly in the mouth, nose, and eyes. In 1562, Elizabeth contracted smallpox, which left her face permanently scarred. Believing that her beauty was a large part of her power, she wore Venetian ceruse, which was a mixture of water, vinegar, and lead. It was used as a face whitener and became the ultimate symbol of class and power. The queen would use this for the rest of her life in order to cover her pockmarks. Of course, the concerning ingredient in that mixture is lead. Now it is common knowledge that lead is highly poisonous to humans, but Elizabeth would have been unaware of this. Common side effects of this toxic cosmetic were skin discoloration, erosion of dental enamel, hair loss, and illness. The makeup was also known to make your skin gray and wrinkled once removed. Because of the lead poisoning Elizabeth was most definitely suffering from, her teeth began to rot and were consequently removed. To prevent the look of hollow cheeks, she would stuff her mouth with rags. I think her fight with smallpox and her subsequent use of Venetian ceruse is why her appearance in the older picture is such a contrast. But the white face that Elizabeth is famously known for is also possible evidence to support the male queen conspiracy. If Elizabeth was a man, it would make sense that he would want to cover his masculine features, most notably a beard or stubble. Elizabeth was extremely particular in her appearance in public and in portraits. Her image was meticulously engineered to convey wealth, authority, and power. After her fight with smallpox, she was never seen without her white face, red lips, rouged cheeks, and elaborate wig, her petticoats, farthingale, stockings, gown, and starched neck ruff. But Elizabeth was not known to wear the heavy makeup before she contracted smallpox. So if she was a male, the debate of her using makeup to cover masculine features does not really hold up, because that would mean that the male Elizabeth would have gone years without the makeup. The only people who were permitted to see the queen out of her full wardrobe were those closest to her, including Kat Ashley and Thomas Parry. Ashley held the highest position in the queen's household, as her Lady of the Bedchamber. With this title, she was the sole assistant who would help with the dressing and undressing of the queen. She would also assist with the application of Elizabeth's heavy makeup. If Elizabeth really was a man, and if Ashley's association in the cover-up was as involved as the story says, then it makes complete sense why Ashley held such a title. She would have been the only one to see Elizabeth as she really was. Thomas Parry was knighted by Elizabeth in 1558 and was given the title as the royal steward and comptroller to the Queen's household. He was also a Privy Council member and a member of Parliament. If Parry and Ashley were the only people who knew of the Queen's real identity, then of course they would be kept close, because they both had active roles. It wasn't just Elizabeth's reputation that was in jeopardy. All three had committed treason. Their ability to maintain their cover-up meant life or death. The favoritism Elizabeth showed to Parry and Ashley did not go unnoticed by her court. In 1549, courtier Sir Robert Tyrwhitt wrote, quote, "I do verily believe that there hath been some secret promise between my lady, Mistress Ashley, and the cofferer, Thomas Parry, never to confess to death." Evidently, this close-knit relationship was perplexing enough to the English court that some believed there was a mysterious secret between them that they would take to the grave. It's an interesting account that I can't debate, which is kind of rare. What I can shed some light on is why the relationship between Kat Ashley and Elizabeth was so steadfast. In 1536, Elizabeth's mother, Anne Boleyn, was executed for treason, and the 3-year-old Elizabeth was stripped of her title of princess, taken from the line of succession, and declared a bastard. In 1537, Kat Ashley was appointed as Elizabeth's governess, and though Elizabeth still had her own household, Kat felt that the young girl's needs were being neglected, and frequently wrote to King Henry to ensure that Elizabeth had all she needed. Catherine became a motherly figure to Elizabeth and came to love the young girl. It was Elizabeth who affectionately gave her the nickname Kat. Knowing how close Kat and Elizabeth were, and knowing that Kat was seen as a mother figure to a girl whose mother was killed before she could really know her, the favoritism Elizabeth showed shouldn't be surprising. She trusted this woman and obviously held her in high regard. Thomas Parry was appointed to Elizabeth's household around the same time as Kat, and I think a kinship was formed. It's possible that Parry was seen as a father figure to the young princess who was neglected by her own father for most of her life. Another pretty obvious argument in support of the boy queen is that Elizabeth never married and never had any children. If she had produced an heir, there would be no question to her gender, but she famously lived and died as the Virgin Queen. Her eventual choice to not marry came at the end of her life. She actively courted and seriously considered multiple partners up until her 50s. She understood that as a queen, she needed to marry and have a Tudor heir to precede her. But she was also aware that a husband and king could possibly risk a loss of power, something she saw her sister Mary live through, causing political instability and insurrection of the people. I can't stress this enough. This is something Elizabeth would never risk. The well-being of her people was more important to her than any happiness she might receive from marriage. And I do believe she put the needs of her people higher than the need to produce an heir. She believed that she was first and foremost married to her country and its people. To support this, I want to read 2 quotes from Elizabeth, and I think they fully convey her love for her people and her unyielding desire to do what was right for them. Quote, "I do assure you, there is no prince that loves his subjects better, or whose love can countervail our love. There is no jewel, be it of never so rich a price, which I set before this jewel. I mean your love. For I do esteem it more than any treasure or riches, for that we know how to prize. But love and thanks I count invaluable, and though God hath raised me high, yet this I count the glory of my crown, that I have reigned with your loves. This makes me that I do not so much rejoice that God hath made me to be queen, but as to be queen over so thankful a people. Therefore I have cause to wish nothing more than to content the subjects, that is a duty which I owe." And the second quote, There will never queen sit in my seat with more zeal to my country, care to my subjects, that will sooner with willingness venture her life for your good and safety than myself. For it is my desire to live nor reign no longer than my life and reign shall be for your good. And though you have had and may have many princes more mighty and wise sitting in this seat, yet you have never had nor shall have any that will be more careful and loving. I'm sorry, but could you imagine King Henry saying something like that? No. I think her choice to remain unmarried was a hard choice. But I think she believed she was the best thing for her country, and anything that might take away her power to govern her people was not worth it in her eyes, even if that meant never producing a Tudor heir. There were rumors that circulated asserting that the queen could not biologically bear children. There is one account from 1559 written by the Count of Feria, an advisor of Philip II of Spain, stating, quote, "If my spies do not lie, which I believe they do not, for certain reasons, which they have recently given me, I understand that she will not bear children." Information like this was relatively easy to come by. You didn't even have to be a spy to hear something like this. Elizabeth's laundress was given hefty bribes to give reports on her menstruation. Her dressers were bribed for information on the queen's body, its normalcy, and its possible physical abnormalities. Her body, her health, and her fertility were a matter of state interest. But I can't think of any reason why he would be making such a blunt statement. Elizabeth did not have a history of irregular or painful periods like her sister Mary, and she was known to be physically healthy and active. She enjoyed riding, hunting, and walking. She wasn't known to be a drinker and did not overindulge with food. To top this off, there are medical records from this time that indicate that the Queen's reproductive health was good. I think we can say that this was written to harm Elizabeth's reputation, which is rude, but it isn't sound evidence for the male queen conspiracy. There is a famous quote by Elizabeth. It is the beginning of a speech made to her troops at Tilbury before the Spanish Armada. It reads thus: "I know I have the body of a weak, feeble woman, but I have the heart and stomach of a king." I think this quote is a good place to start to illustrate why, in my opinion, this conspiracy exists in the first place. And from the way I see it, it all stems from sexism. Elizabeth was just too darn smart to be a woman. Therefore, she had to be a man. And I'm not going to get preachy and start pointing fingers, because I don't believe any man born in the last few decades would agree with this conspiracy theory, simply because they don't believe that a woman has the mental capacity to be such a great ruler. But back in the late 1500s, and all the way up to the publication of Famous Impostors in 1910, it was a different story. Women throughout history were believed to be intellectually limited. And this wasn't just men who believed this, women did too. They believed by nature that they were incapable of higher learning, and made for domestic duties only. Men at the time believed that women did not have the capacity for rational thought. This higher intellect was reserved for men alone. Women, it was assumed, were led only by their passions, and therefore rational thought was beyond them. Elizabeth was very aware how men viewed her as a woman in power. She knew that they would always have their doubts about her. So when she is saying, "I have the body of a weak, feeble woman and the heart of a king," she is trying to garner their support by satiating their suspicions and fears. She wants and needs their trust and support, but she knows that they hold a deep prejudice against her, simply because of her gender. It is her way of relating to their fears and assuring that she, though female, can rule as well as any man. Elizabeth died on March 24, 1603, at the age of 69. The cause of her death remains unknown because she forbade any type of post-mortem examination. Her decision to forego an autopsy is questionable, and a tad suspicious if we look at her as someone trying to conceal a secret identity. But even just from my research, I think I can speculate why this was her final wish. Elizabeth was vain. Her appearance and reputation were everything to her. And like us all, she couldn't escape the onslaught of time. And as she aged, her beauty faded. This was only perpetuated by the self-inflicted lead poisoning, which I think is the most probable cause of death. Because she was so consumed with her image in life, in my opinion, I think she would want the same kind of control in death. Her reign is known as the Elizabethan era, and it is considered to be the golden age of English history. She oversaw a period of internal peace and financial prosperity, but also international expansion and naval triumph. Her actions and patronage and the atmosphere of her court nurtured and influenced artists and writers such as William Shakespeare. In my opinion, she is easily one of the most influential rulers in English history. Her accomplishments speak for themselves. 300 years after Elizabeth's body was entombed alongside her sisters in Westminster Abbey, a local reverend by the name of Thomas Keble discovered an unmarked grave on the grounds of Overcourt. In the stone coffin were the skeletal remains of a young girl, opulently dressed in Tudor clothing. The reverend reburied the mysterious remains in an unmarked grave, and to this day they have never been located. There is no way of knowing who this little girl was. The only evidence we have that she even existed is the stone coffin, which still sits on the church grounds directly adjacent to Overcourt Manor today. Because there is no way to prove without a doubt that this corpse was the body of the young princess, its existence adds a level of mystery to the story that only deepens my curiosity and makes me want to dig deeper. But the further you go with this, the more you realize it's a pretty shallow debate, and I think it was always meant to be that way, because it's just a story. Though I have outlined that I believe this story was born from prejudice, I do think it's harmless, because when you look at her accomplishments, it all becomes inconsequential. I think the best way to sum this up is with a quote from Famous Impostors by Bram Stoker. "All honor to her, whoever she may have been, boy or girl, matters not."